The desert night was alive with whispers. The restless breath of the wind sweeping over the mesas, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and smoke. Under the dim red light of a blood moon, a lone figure darted through the canyons. Barefoot, trembling, her dress torn at the seams and stained with dust and fear. She was no ordinary runaway. She was Ayana, daughter of the tribal chieftain of the Red River Nation. A girl once promised to a warrior twice her age. But tonight, she had shattered the chains of tradition. The echo of drums still thundered behind her in memory, a reminder of the ceremony she fled. Every step tore her feet against the sharp rocks, yet she ran, heart pounding like a drumbeat of rebellion. The world had grown cruel and small in her father's camp. Whispers of control, of ownership, of alliances sealed in blood. And she had said no. No to a loveless life, no to being traded like cattle. The canyon opened into the wide, open stretch of the Badlands, a graveyard of stone and silence. The stars looked down coldly, their light glinting off the silver knife she still clutched. The same blade she had stolen from her intended husband's tent before running. She didn't yet know where she would go, only that she would never go back. Behind her, faint in the distance, came the shouts of men, trackers, warriors, her kin. They were closing in. Ayana's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled over a dry riverbed, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg, and she fell hard onto the cracked earth. The world tilted and blurred. The sound of hooves broke through the night. For a moment, she thought it was over, that they had found her, but the rhythm was different. Not the steady pounding of tribal horses, but the lone, slower gait of a frontier stallion. Out of the darkness rode a figure. Tall, dust-covered, and silent. A man on horseback, his hat pulled low, his face shadowed by the moonlight. He reined in beside her, eyes narrowing as he looked down at the broken girl sprawled in the dust. He could see the fear in her eyes, the defiance too. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. She flinched back, gripping the knife tighter, though her hand shook violently. He didn't speak. Didn't move closer. Just crouched down, eyes scanning the horizon behind her, listening to the faraway cries echoing off the canyon walls. Then, with the wordless calm of a man who had seen enough violence for 10 lifetimes, he reached into his saddlebag and tossed her a canteen. The water splashed over her hands before she could even drink it. Ayana looked at him, confusion and suspicion warring in her eyes. She had been raised to fear cowboys, outlaws of the plains, drifters who lived without honor. But this man, he didn't look cruel, just tired, like he carried ghosts heavier than his saddle. He turned his horse and gestured with a slight nod of his head toward the west, away from the sound of pursuit. Then he mounted again, waiting. Ayana hesitated. Behind her were men who would drag her home in chains. Ahead a stranger whose name she didn't know, whose mercy she couldn't trust. But she saw something in the way he sat his horse, in the stillness of his presence. Something that felt like safety. Or at least, the chance of it. She limped toward him, clutching the torn remains of her dress. Without a word he leaned down, offered his hand. She stared at it for a long time, then took it. The cowboy pulled her up behind him and spurred the horse into the darkness. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by the wide, endless night. The desert wind rose again, sweeping their tracks away under the moonlight, as if the earth itself wanted to hide them. They rode until dawn. When the first light of morning touched the red rocks, Ayana was barely awake, her head resting against the stranger's back. He hadn't spoken a single word. But his silence had said everything. "You're safe now." As the horizon began to glow gold and rose, the cowboy finally slowed his horse, near a shallow ravine where a stream whispered through the stones. He helped her down gently, and she could see now the wariness in his face, the scar across his jaw, the shadow of grief behind his eyes. He poured water over her wounded ankle, wrapped it with a strip torn from his shirt. She tried to speak, to thank him, to ask his name. But her throat was too dry, her words lost in the rising sun. He only looked at her once, then turned toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, danger still waited, from her tribe, and perhaps from his own past. But for now, beneath the blazing dawn, the girl who had run from her tribe and the cowboy, who didn't let her fall, shared the same silence. Fragile, uncertain, but alive. And that was enough. As the sun climbed higher, a hawk circled above them, its cry echoing through the canyon, a promise and a warning all at once. The sun rose slow over the desert plains, spilling gold light across the sandstone cliffs. The night had washed away, but the danger hadn't. Dust hung in the still air, and the echoes of pursuit were only a day behind. The cowboy knew it. The girl didn't need to ask. He was a man used to silence, a drifter molded by loss and dust. His name, once known in distant saloons and bounty lists, had faded like smoke. Some called him the man with no home, others just Cole. To him, names didn't matter, only the road did. He had found her broken and wild under the red moon, a girl with eyes full of fire and terror, her dress torn like a flag of defiance. He hadn't asked who she was or why she ran. He had seen enough people running in his life to understand that no one ran unless they had to. Now, as dawn spread its light, Cole's horse carried them west, toward land untouched by tribe or law. The girl clung to the saddle behind him, her small hands gripping his coat for balance. Her breathing had steadied through the night, though the fear hadn't left her. They stopped at a small stream cutting through the rocks. Cole dismounted first, tying the reins around a low branch. The girl limped to the water's edge, kneeling to wash the dust from her hands. Her reflection trembled on the surface. Bruised, bloodied, but alive. For the first time, she felt what freedom cost. Cole built a small fire, his movements methodical, unhurried. He cooked the last of his provisions, jerky, beans, and a scrap of bread. He handed her food and turned his gaze away, giving her the dignity of silence. She ate slowly, as if afraid the food might vanish. He watched the horizon the whole time. The wind carried scents, sage, smoke, and faint traces of horse. He knew trackers were out there, following her trail. Tribal hunters didn't give up easily, especially when it came to a chief's daughter. But there was something else that lingered in his thoughts, the way she had looked at him under the blood moon. Not with fear alone, but with something deeper. A strange kind of trust. He hadn't felt that in years, not since before the war. By mid-morning, they rode again. The desert changed around them, from open plain to rugged hills and thick mesquite. The path twisted, hidden from easy pursuit. Cole had traveled these lands before, years ago, when he was still running from his own ghosts. The girl's name finally came to him as she murmured it softly, while half asleep against his back. Ayana. A name that meant eternal blossom in her people's tongue. It didn't fit the world she was running through. A place of dust and death. Yet it fit her spirit perfectly. The day burned hot. By afternoon, they found shade beneath a rocky overhang. Cole let the horse rest and checked her ankle again. It had swollen badly, but the bleeding had stopped. He tore another strip from his sleeve and wrapped it carefully. Her eyes followed his hands. Scarred, steady, the hands of a man who had worked and fought too long. There was something about his silence that comforted her. It wasn't cold, it was protective. The kind of quiet that shielded instead of shut out, and though no words passed between them, the space between their breaths began to soften. The beginning of an unspoken bond. But peace was short-lived in the west. As the shadows grew long, the sound of distant cries reached them, faint, but unmistakable. Her tribe's riders had picked up the trail again. Cole rose instantly, scanning the horizon. Dust plumes on the far ridge confirmed it. They were closing in, maybe half a day behind. He dozed the fire, packed their few belongings, and helped her mount again. The horse, sensing urgency, snorted and shifted its weight. Cole glanced once more toward the east. then turned westward into the rising wind. The landscape grew harsher with each mile. Ridges like broken teeth, ravines that swallowed sound. They rode into the bones of the earth itself. The girl held tighter now, her heartbeat thudding against his back. She didn't know where he was leading her, but she trusted the way he moved. Precise, fearless, guided by instinct. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a canyon. Below them stretched a maze of stone and shadow. A place where even the stars seemed to lose their way. Cole led the horse down a narrow path, the descent steep and dangerous. The air turned cold. At the canyon floor, he found a hollow in the rock, an old miner's shelter, long abandoned. Inside were rusted tools and the faint smell of long, dead fires. He made camp there, setting the horse nearby and covering the entrance with brush. The girl sat near the flames, her eyes flickering with reflection. The memories of her tribe weighed heavy. Her father's anger, her people's chants, the binding ropes of tradition. She wondered if freedom always had to hurt this much. Cole sat opposite her, cleaning his revolver in silence. He wasn't afraid of men chasing him. He had faced worse. Bounty hunters, soldiers, the faces of men he'd left behind. But something about this chase felt different. It wasn't his fight, yet he couldn't walk away from it. The wind howled outside the cave, carrying voices that weren't there. Echoes of the past, perhaps, or the desert itself warning them, both that their stories were not yet finished. As the firelight danced across her torn dress and his weathered face, it painted two worlds colliding, the wild heart of the frontier and the ancient blood of the tribe. Both outcasts now, both hunted by what they'd left behind. The girl drifted to sleep, her breathing soft and steady. Cole stayed awake, staring into the embers. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning, that saving her would drag him back into the kind of fight he'd sworn never to return to. He listened to the wind until the stars dimmed. The first light of dawn was still hours away when he heard it. The distant, rhythmic thunder of hooves once more. They had found the canyon. Cole's hand rested on his revolver, his gaze steady and cold. He knew what was coming. And yet, as he looked back at the sleeping girl, fragile, fierce, free, he made a silent promise he wouldn't let her fall. Not now. Not ever. Outside, the wind shifted. The chase was closing in. The night lay heavy over the canyon, thick with silence and waiting. The fire had died down to embers, painting the cave walls in a dull red glow. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint tremor of hooves, distant yet certain. Cole had heard it long before the girl stirred. He had known this moment was coming since the first glimpse of her bruised face beneath the blood moon. Now, the hunt had reached them. The canyon stretched for miles, a labyrinth of stone where sound twisted and vanished. It was both a sanctuary and a trap. Cole stood at the mouth of the cave, eyes narrowed against the moonlight. The girl, Ayanna, slept restlessly behind him, her breathing shallow, her dreams haunted by what she had fled. He didn't wake her yet. She needed every moment of rest. Cole's mind drifted to old memories. Wars fought in the dust, men dying for flags and pride. He had sworn he would never draw his gun for another cause again. But now, fate had put him in the path of a cause he didn't choose. A girl too young to die, too stubborn to surrender. When the first rider's torch appeared on the ridge, Cole knew the time for silence was over. He moved quickly, packing what little they had, covering the fire's glow, and tightening the horse's reins. His movements were calm, almost ritualistic. The practiced readiness of a man who had lived too long on the run. Ayanna stirred awake, sensing danger before seeing it. Her eyes flicked to him, then to the faint orange light flickering on the canyon walls. The realization hit her like cold water. Her tribe had found them. Cole gave a slow nod, signaling for quiet. She didn't need words to understand. Her body trembled as she rose, favoring her injured ankle, but determination straightened her spine. She would not be taken back. Not alive. They slipped out into the shadows, moving along the canyon's base. The rocks loomed tall around them, cutting off the sky. Cole led the horse by hand, its hooves muffled by the sand. He knew these paths, or at least, he knew enough to gamble on them. There was a narrow split ahead, a hidden pass that wound upward toward the open plains. If they reached it before dawn, they might vanish again. But fate had other plans. A sudden flare of torchlight illuminated the far ridge, riders descending fast, their war cries echoing through the stone maze. Cole cursed silently under his breath and pushed Ayanna ahead, motioning for her to move faster. The horse snorted, nervous. The air filled with the sound of pursuit. Hooves striking stone, voices shouting her name in the old tongue. Ayanna's breath came in gasps as she stumbled through the narrow trail. Behind them, Cole turned once, then drawn. His face hardened into something carved from the desert itself. He had no choice now. The first rider appeared out of the dark, a shadow against the torchlight. Cole didn't hesitate. A single shot cracked through the canyon, echoing like thunder. The rider fell, his torch tumbling into the sand and snuffing out. The others pulled up short, surprised by the echo of a gun, something unfamiliar to their world of arrows and blades. The canyon went still for a heartbeat. Then the chase resumed, fiercer than before. Cole fired again, then again, forcing them to scatter. The noise rolled through the canyon like a storm, waking every echo, stirring every ghost. Ayanna turned once to look, her heart twisting with guilt. These were her people, her brothers, cousins, men who had shared her childhood fires. Now they were enemies, bound by orders to drag her home. Cole caught up to her, his expression unreadable. The canyon's walls closed tighter, forcing them to squeeze between slabs of red stone. The moonlight above turned thin and silver. Dust clung to their skin like sweat. By the time they reached the narrow pass, dawn was already bleeding into the sky. The riders were close. Too close. Cole could hear their horses behind them, the whistle of arrows striking rock. One grazed his arm, tearing a line of blood across his sleeve. He didn't flinch. He pushed Ayanna up the final slope, his hand steady at her back. The horse scrambled beside them, its sides heaving with effort. When they reached the crest, the land opened wide, a stretch of wild prairie, endless and golden under the rising sun. Freedom lay beyond. But freedom always demanded a price. As Cole turned back toward the canyon mouth, he saw them. 3 riders emerging from the shadows, bows raised, their faces painted for battle. He raised his gun, fired twice, and ducked behind a rock. The girl screamed soundlessly, reaching for him as another arrow whistled past. The horse bolted, startled by the noise, galloping into the open plain. Cole motioned for Ayanna to go, to run. But she hesitated, torn between survival and the man who had become her shield. He didn't let her decide. With one last look, he turned and fired a final shot into the canyon wall. The explosion of rock sent dust and rubble cascading down, sealing the narrow trail behind them. The echo rolled like thunder, cutting off the sound of pursuit. When the dust cleared, silence returned. Only the wind remained, whispering through the shattered stone. Ayanna stumbled forward, coughing from the dust, her heart breaking with every breath. The canyon behind them was now a brave of echoes. Her people, trapped beyond the fallen rock, their cries fading with the wind. She turned toward Cole, who stood motionless, revolver lowered, his chest rising and falling with slow, exhausted breaths. He looked older in the light, more human, more haunted. The blood on his arm glistened darkly. Yet there was no triumph in his eyes, only the wary acceptance of a man who knew he could never go back. They stood together on the ridge, watching the sun climb over the prairie. For the first time, there were no chains on her, no drums, no vows, just the open land stretching endlessly ahead. Cole holstered his gun, mounted the horse, and reached down a hand for her. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The horse moved forward, slow and steady, carrying them into the golden light. Behind them, the canyon smoldered with the last traces of smoke. a reminder of what they'd left behind, and of what could never be undone. As they rode into the new day, the sky widened, vast and merciless. Freedom had come, but it had come at a cost, one neither of them yet understood. The wind shifted, carrying faint cries that could have been ghosts or memory. Ayanna looked back only once, then faced forward again. Her tribe would mourn her as lost. But she was not lost, she was becoming something else. Something wild, untamed, reborn in the dust and blood of the West. And beside her rode the man with no home, silent and steady, bound now to her fate whether he willed it or not. Far ahead, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Dark, heavy, promising that their journey was far from over. The sun had risen high over the prairie, but its warmth carried no comfort. Ayanna and Cole rode in silence, their shadows long across the golden grass. Behind them, the canyon lay buried in dust and memory, a grave of voices that would never fade from her mind. Ahead, the vast emptiness of the frontier stretched endlessly, unforgiving and unknown. The girl in the torn dress had escaped her tribe, but freedom in the Wild West was a dangerous kind of salvation. The land was wide, but not empty. Every town, every ridge, every stranger carried a story, and most of them ended in blood. Cole rode steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had been quiet since the canyon. There was a heaviness in him now, the look of a man who had taken life again when he had sworn never to. He didn't regret saving her, but he knew the dead had a way of following a man, even across open plains. By midday, they reached the edge of Deadwood Plains, a vast stretch of grassland broken only by blackened tree stumps and skeletal fences. Years ago, it had been a battlefield. Now it was only ghosts and wind. The air began to change. Clouds thickened in the west, turning the sky to iron. A storm was coming, not just rain, but a full prairie tempest, the kind that could swallow a man whole. Cole knew they had little time. He urged the horse forward, his every sense alert. They found shelter near the ruins of an old cabin. Just 4 walls and a half, fallen roof. The wood was weathered gray, the door barely hanging from its hinges. It wasn't much, but it was cover from the coming storm. Inside, Ayanna sank against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up. The wind howled outside, lifting dust into the air like ash. Her torn dress clung to her skin, streaked with mud and dried blood. Cole found a tattered blanket among the debris and draped it over her shoulders. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. As thunder rolled across the plains, Ayanna stared out through a gap in the wall. Lightning split the horizon, revealing flashes of endless grass and distant shapes. Wild horses, perhaps, or something darker. She thought of her tribe then, of what her father must be feeling. Anger, shame, loss. She wondered if he had truly loved her, or if she had only ever been a symbol of his pride. The storm broke suddenly, rain slashing against the cabin in sheets. The roof groaned under the weight of it. Cole moved to the doorway, watching the plains vanish beneath waves of silver rain. For a moment, the wind carried more than just water. It carried sound, faint, fleeting, the cry of riders far off. He tensed. It wasn't her tribe this time. The cadence was wrong, the rhythm heavier, deliberate. He recognized it from another life. Bounty riders. Men who hunted not for justice but for coin. Cole's name, long forgotten in most towns, still lingered in some, especially in places where whiskey and greed ran thicker than water. And out here, word traveled fast. If anyone had seen them pass through, it wouldn't take long before bounty hunters came sniffing around. The rain grew harsher, masking sound but not fear. Cole checked his revolver, counting the bullets. He had few left after the canyon. Ayanna watched him from across the room. Even in his silence, she could feel his unease. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was running too. Not from her tribe, but from his own past. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way he scanned the horizon even through the storm. By evening, the thunder began to fade, replaced by the steady hiss of rain. Cole set what remained of their supplies on the old table. Dried beans, a small flask, and a strip of jerky. He ate little, saving most for her. Ayanna tried to sleep, but the wind wouldn't let her. It howled through the gaps in the wood, moaning like a voice. When dawn finally crept through the cracks, the plains were a sea of mud and silence. The storm had passed, but something darker waited beyond the fog. Cole's horse shifted nervously, its ears twitching. He went to the window, scanning the horizon. There, in the distance, the faint outline of riders moving slow through the mist. 4 of them, maybe 5. They weren't tribal scouts. These were white men, armed and deliberate. Cole's heart sank. The past had found him. He turned back to Ayanna, who was already awake, her instinct sharp as the wind. Without words, she began gathering their things. She didn't need to ask. She could read it in his eyes. They had to move. They slipped out the back of the cabin, leading the horse through knee-high grass still slick with rain. The land was quiet except for the distant call of crows. Every sound felt like a warning. As the fog lifted, the plains stretched open once more, but the riders were closer now. Cole could see their dust trails through the wet earth. Men who had hunted him before. One of them limping, another carrying a shotgun. Faces he remembered from another life. A robbery gone wrong, a price he never paid. He knew running would only delay the inevitable. The plains offered no cover, and Ayanna's ankle was still weak. He needed to think, and fast. They reached a line of broken fences and the remains of an old windmill. Cole tied the horse low behind the wreckage, scanning for options. The girl crouched beside him, her breath ragged. She wasn't afraid for herself anymore. She was afraid for him. The bounty riders came slow, cautious, spreading out across the field. They didn't call out. Men like that didn't waste words. They just hunted. Cole gripped his revolver tighter. He could take a few, maybe, but not all. Not with her here. He'd faced worse odds before, but this time, someone else's life weighed on the trigger. The windmill creaked above them, the sound sharp against the silence. Then came a whistle. One of the men signaling the others. They had found the horse tracks. Cole's jaw clenched. He turned to Ayanna, eyes steady, a silent message passing between them. If anything happens, you run. The riders fanned out. Mud squelched under their boots. One man called to another, voice rough and familiar. The past had arrived, and it wanted blood. The girl in the torn dress pressed herself low to the earth, heart pounding. The storm had passed, but the real thunder was only beginning. Cole rose slowly, moving like a shadow through the wreckage. His gun caught the morning light for just a second before he vanished behind the windmill's frame. The hunters dismounted, their boots thudding on the wet ground. The first shot cracked the silence, rolling across the plains like the echo of the storm. Ayanna's hands trembled. She didn't know if he would survive this one, or if she could run without him. The sound of gunfire filled the air once more, mingling with the cries of crows and the hiss of the dying wind. The air was thick with gun smoke and rain-soaked dust. Every echo from the gunfire rolled across the deadwood plains like thunder after the storm. Cole's revolver barked again, a sharp sound that split the silence wide open. One bounty rider fell, his body collapsing into the mud. The others ducked behind the standing fences, shouting to one another, but their words were carried off by the wind. The girl, Ayanna, lay pressed against the earth, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. The ground was cold beneath her fingers. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat reminded her that death was close. She had run from her tribe, from the men who had once sworn to protect her. But this was a different kind of chase. These men didn't care about honor or blood. They cared about money. Cole reloaded quickly, his hand steady even as the rain began again, soft at first, then heavier. The world around him blurred into motion. The wet grass, the flicker of lightning far away, the steam rising from the barrel of his gun. He had lived his life on borrowed time. He knew the rules of survival in the West. You draw fast, or you fall. But today, his fight wasn't just for himself. The girl behind him, broken, stubborn, and alive, had changed the rhythm of his heart. The bounty men were seasoned hunters. They spread out, flanking the wreckage, moving through the mud with deliberate steps. Cole saw one on the left. A tall man with a scar down his cheek. The same man who'd once called him brother. Now, he was just another gun for hire. The scarred man raised his rifle, steady and sure. Cole dropped behind a broken beam as the bullet splintered the wood above his head. He felt the sting of a fragment cut his neck, but he didn't flinch. Another shot rang out, this time from Cole's revolver. The scarred man staggered, fell to one knee, and then collapsed into the wet earth. Ayanna covered her mouth, trembling, trying not to make a sound. She could see it now. The man she had followed into freedom, standing against a world that refused to let him rest. His movements were like a dance. Precise, controlled, born of necessity, not rage. But the bounty riders were relentless. Two more advanced from the right, one firing, the other circling wide. Cole's ammunition was running low. He counted the bullets in his head, each shot bringing him closer to the end. The rain poured harder, blurring the line between man and ghost. The field was turning to a swamp of blood and mud. Cole backed up slowly, motioning for Ayanna to stay low. His coat was torn, his arm bleeding from a grazing shot, but his focus didn't break. He moved toward the windmill, ducking behind the steel skeleton. The creaking blades groaned above him, turning lazily in the storm. The sound masked his movement. The riders shouted again, angry, uncertain. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the plains. For a brief second, everything stood still. Ayanna saw Cole standing tall, revolver raised, his silhouette sharp against the sky. And then darkness again. The next shot ended it. One man down. Then another. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of rain. The last bounty rider, the youngest, dropped his weapon and raised his hands. He wasn't brave enough to die for the price on Cole's head. Cole stared at him for a long moment through the downpour, his jaw tight. And then, he lowered his gun. Mercy. The one thing the West didn't believe in. The young man turned and fled into the rain, his boots, splashing through puddles, vanishing into the gray. Cole watched him go, his revolver still steady, but he didn't pull the trigger. He knew what mercy cost. He'd pay it later. When the last echo faded, Cole turned toward Ayanna. She was still crouched low, her torn dress clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes met his, wide, unblinking, full of fear and something else he couldn't name. He holstered his gun and walked toward her. The mud clung to his boots, heavy and cold. His face was streaked with blood and rain, but his expression was calm. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as the storm began to die. The plains stretched empty again, quiet but not peaceful. The dead lay scattered in the grass, their blood running with the rain. Ayanna looked at them, then at Cole. She didn't understand how one man could carry so much sorrow and still keep standing. He led her to the horse, lifted her up, and mounted behind her. The animal snorted, uneasy, but obeyed. They rode west, away from the wreckage, toward the edge of the plains where the land dipped into rolling hills. The storm was fading now, replaced by a low mist that crawled across the ground. The air smelled of iron and wet earth. The silence was heavy, not from peace, but from the weight of what had been done. Cole didn't look back. He never did. He had learned long ago that looking back was how men got lost. But his mind wouldn't let him rest. He could still see the face of the young bounty hunter he had spared. He knew that mercy would not go unanswered. In the West, every good deed carved another scar. They rode for hours, the girl leaning against his back, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. When they reached a cluster of oak trees near a shallow river, Cole stopped. He helped her down and let the horse drink. The girl sat by the water, staring at her reflection. Her torn dress hung from her like a second skin. She was no longer the chieftain's daughter. no longer the symbol of her people's pride. She was something new now, something the desert had remade. Cole watched her quietly. He didn't know why he still rode beside her, or what it meant. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe he saw in her the one thing he had lost long ago. A reason to keep moving. The sun broke through the clouds then, pale and distant. The world shimmered in gold and gray. For a moment, it looked almost beautiful. But Cole knew beauty in the west never lasted. Far behind them, beyond the horizon, the boy he had spared rode hard toward the next town. A town filled with men eager for stories, for revenge, for the smell of blood. Cole's mercy had bought them a few hours of peace. No more. As the light faded, he glanced at the girl once more. She was sitting quietly, her eyes fixed on the river, as if seeing her own fate in the ripples. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint toll of a distant church bell. A sound too far away to be real. It was the kind of sound that reminded men they were still alive. For now. Cole turned his gaze west again. Beyond the next ridge lay a settlement. A mining town where the law was thin and the whiskey cheap. It was a place to rest, maybe to disappear. But deep down, he knew peace would not come easily. Not for her. Not for him. As the sun dipped low and the plains turned red once more, they mounted the horse again, riding toward the dying light. The road stretched endless, the sky vast and merciless. The girl in the torn dress had escaped one world, only to find herself in another. One where freedom and danger walked hand in hand. And the cowboy beside her, the man who had shown mercy, carried the weight of every bullet he hadn't fired. The plains were quiet again, but the storm had only changed shape. It was no longer in the sky. It was behind them, and it was coming fast. The dawn came slow and heavy over the desert plain, casting a pale light across the broken land. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain and iron. Cole rode in silence, his eyes scanning the distant ridge, where the first glint of sun touched the hills. The girl, Ayanna, sat behind him, her arms loosely around his waist, her face resting against the worn leather of his coat. The torn edges of her dress fluttered in the dry wind, like the last remains of a flag surrendering to time. They had been riding since nightfall, crossing miles of open country with no clear destination. Every sound, the creak of the saddle, the slow rhythm of the horse's hooves, felt like the ticking of a clock that was running out. Cole knew they couldn't run forever. The bounty riders would return. Mercy had a price, and in the west, it was always collected in blood. The land ahead shimmered gold and gray, dotted with sparse mesquite and cactus. In the far distance, smoke rose faintly from a small mining town. Cole knew the place. Dust Creek. A town where men forgot who they were, where whiskey washed away names and sins alike. It wasn't safe, but nowhere was. He figured it was as good a place as any to disappear. The girl stirred as they neared the ridge, her eyes opening to the first light of day. Her skin caught the sunrise, glowing faintly against the scars of the night before. She looked ahead, toward the faint line of the town, and for a moment, her breath caught. Freedom looked close, but it was the kind of closeness that never promised safety. Cole slowed the horse as they reached the edge of a dry riverbed. The town lay just beyond it, still waking from sleep. Smoke curled from chimneys, and a few miners trudged down the road toward the saloon. To anyone watching, they were just two travelers, one rough, one broken, both worn thin by the road. They dismounted near the edge of town. Cole helped her down gently, his hands firm but careful. She was light as a whisper, yet her presence filled the space around them with something heavier than words. He tied the horse to a post outside an abandoned barn and looked toward the saloon. Inside, the murmur of early voices drifted through the cracked door. Men talking low, the scrape of boots against the floor, the shuffle of cards. It was the kind of sound Cole had known his whole life, the rhythm of restless souls pretending they weren't running from anything. They found shelter in a small, half-ruined chapel on the hill above town. Its windows were broken, and the bell tower leaned to one side. But it was quiet. Cole laid out his coat on the floorboards and let Ayanna rest. The morning light slanted through the gaps in the roof, painting lines of gold across her face. He sat by the doorway, watching the trail below. Every rider that appeared on the horizon made his hand drift to his revolver, but none came close. The quiet was deceptive, but it was all they had left. Ayanna slept fitfully, her dreams tangled with memories of firelight, drums, and the faces of those she had fled. She had run from her tribe, from a fate she could not accept. But freedom was a cruel teacher, and it had shown her that every choice came with loss. Still, she had found something she didn't expect on this road. A man who fought for her when no one else would. Who carried her through the storm, not because of who she was, but because he couldn't let her fall. As the sun climbed higher, Cole walked down to the river to fill his canteen. The air was dry and still. He bent low, scooping up the cool water, when he saw movement in the reflection. A glint of metal, the flicker of riders. They had found him. He straightened, his pulse steady but heavy. Dust rose from the horizon, 6 men, riding hard. The bounty riders. The boy he had spared was among them. Mercy had circled back, just as he knew it would. Cole turned and climbed the hill fast, boots kicking up sand. He reached the chapel door and glanced at Ayanna. She was awake now, watching him with wide eyes, sensing what was coming before he said a word. The silence between them was louder than any goodbye. He took position by the broken doorway, the revolver in his hand, the other resting on the wall for balance. The riders were coming fast, their shouts carrying on the wind. The world seemed to hold its breath. The sun was high now, burning through the haze, turning the chapel's cross into a black shadow against the gold. The first rider came into view. Cole fired once. The man fell. The next tried to flank left. Another shot. Then another. The old wood of the chapel shuddered with every impact. Bullets splintered the frame. Dust rained from the rafters. Cole's arm burned where a shot grazed him, but he didn't stop. He moved with precision, each motion practiced, deliberate. Ayanna stayed low, clutching a piece of cloth torn from his coat, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. The world outside was chaos, gunfire, hoofbeats, men shouting. But inside, time moved slow. One by one, the riders fell. But the boy, the one with fear still written on his face, made it to the doorway. Cole saw him clearly now, and for a heartbeat, he hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The gun flashed. The bullet struck Cole high in the chest. He stumbled back, the revolver slipping from his fingers. The boy froze, realization breaking across his face too late. Ayanna ran to Cole's side, catching him before he fell completely. His hand gripped her arm, strong even as his breath faltered. The sound of the wind filled the chapel again, carrying with it the scent of dust and blood and distant thunder. The last rider turned and fled. The boy followed, his horse kicking up a trail of regret behind him. And then, silence. Cole lay still, the sunlight flickering across his face through the broken roof. His eyes were open, looking past her, to the world beyond. Ayanna held him close, her torn dress now stained with his blood, her tears falling silently onto his chest. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of the river and the faint toll of the chapel's broken bell. It rang once, twice, then stopped. Outside the land was vast and still. The sun hung low, beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The light stretched long across the plains, wrapping everything in gold. Ayanna rose slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked to the doorway, the wind lifting the edges of her dress. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was no fear left in her eyes. Only something fierce and steady. She looked toward the horizon, where the last of the riders had vanished, and then back at the man who had refused to let her fall. She knelt beside him once more, pressing her forehead to his hand, and whispered a promise only the wind would hear. As the sun began to set, she took his hat, placed it over her heart, and walked down the hill. The world behind her was painted in shades of fire and sorrow. The sky burned red, the kind of red that only came at the end of something that mattered. Ayanna didn't look back. She carried his memory with her, as constant as the plains, as endless as the road. The girl in the torn dress had become something else now, stronger, quieter, unbroken. And somewhere in that dying light, the cowboy's shadow stretched long beside hers, following her into the horizon. The sun sank behind the hills, and the world turned gold, then gray, then silent. The story of the girl and the cowboy ended there, under the last sunset the West would ever remember.